Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today we're actually not going to paint anything. Unfortunately it is still way too warm to have the lamps going either side of me, and that would mean that you're not going to get the best look at whatever we're going to do. Also, paint dries on my brush. It's crazy. Luckily, tomorrow they reckon the weather is going to break and we're going to get some cooler days. So with any luck, we can get back onto actually painting some toy soldiers. But in the meantime, I get a lot of questions about varnishing and shades, and I figured now might be a good opportunity to just touch on both of those quickly and go through some of the pitfalls that you can avoid and reasons you might want to use one or the other. Now to start off with, we'll tackle the shades first. One of the questions I get really regularly is, my shade is drying shiny, why is that? Now I've got here a nice little bottle of Fuegan Orange because this is going to very handily demonstrate what I've got going. So if you take your pots, you give them a good shake before you get started, okay? You then go ahead, put it over the miniature, and it still dries a little shiny. Simply put, shake it more. Have the look over the bottom of these things. If we tip it upside down, now I haven't shaken this one yet, but you'll see it's not clear around the top. All right, some of the sediment is still sitting at the bottom of that container. Now you might notice the same on things like Null Oil or Agrax Earthshade, although because we use those a little bit more, they tend to be a bit better mixed in. So what I'm going to do, give this a shake. And if we have a look, you see how it's cleared up a little bit. Let's just get that further away. But there is still some of that gunk that's not just bubbles. So now, as if to vex me, make a liar out of me, it's gone all really quite bubbly, but that's okay, it's because I shook it as hard as I did. But you'll notice still that it's flowing away and it's leaving nothing behind. Where you see those little bubbles of actual air, the plastic through it is clear, and that's what you want. All right, that is number one check of, is this going to dry properly on my models? So that's the easy step to look for with the shades, okay? Number one question I get asked all the time, answered. Okay, shake the ever-loving snot out of them. But what we've got as well is the option of varnishing. And people ask me sometimes, why varnish a model? And simply put, you would normally do it because you want to protect a paint job, or maybe there's some decals or something that you want to protect from rough handling. Now the other reason one might choose to varnish is because it changes how the color works over a model. So I think I've seen before where, like my Ultramarines, for example, these guys lurking in the back, they tend to have a little bit of a sort of plastic shine to them. And that's because I tend to use either this matte Vallejo varnish, or I use the Munitorum varnish spray. And we'll get onto that one in a minute. With these two varnishes though, these are my go-tos. Okay. Now for example, with the matte acrylic varnish from Vallejo, this will probably not show up perfectly well with just the desk lamp, but you see there is a very faint sort of shine to the surface of the miniature. Works pretty well for most things, gaming applications in particular, it works well. It hides a lot of sins, and I quite like it. This is the closest one that comes in a pot to Munitorum varnish. Now it says matte, but it does have a very slight sort of satin sheen to it. But by comparison, here is AK Interactive's Ultra Matte Varnish, and they are not kidding around. Okay, when they say Ultra Matte, it is smoother even than the paint when that goes on. So as far as getting something which is absolutely not going to reflect anything, if you want matte finish, then AK Interactive's, their website's a bit of a trick to navigate, but the product's very good, and it does come in a nice big bottle. You can just brush that straight on. Little bit of water helps. As well with these varnishes, what it pays to do is put on just a little bit at a time. You don't want to bucket these all over a miniature, because if they settle in the recesses, particularly the matte varnish, you'll sometimes get a very slight sort of frosty cloudedness in the recesses where too much of that can collect. Now on the subject of frosting and clouding and stuff like that, you may have come across, if you've been using spray varnishes, an instance where you will have it frost up. Sometimes it is the humidity, sometimes it is the ambient temperature, sometimes it's the surface of the miniature. there's all number of things which people will say is the cause of frosting in miniatures. Now, I don't actually have any handy to show off because I tend to try and fix them fairly quickly, but there are two spray varnishes which come to mind, which are really handy, and one of them I can recommend personally. Now, Munitorum Varnish, you can probably hear me reaching for it. This sucker here, okay? It is fantastic. I have sprayed this when it's raining. I have sprayed it in 36 Celsius. I've sprayed it in high humidity. This stuff does not misbehave. I've never had it frost in the worst circumstances. I shake it up for about a minute before I use it. A couple of quick sprays, and I'm going to get to this. Like I said, there's a little bit of a tricky bit at the end here you guys might like. But this is my go-to. The other that I hear a lot of good things about is Tester's Dull Coat. Now, the reason why I don't use that is that it's a little bit more difficult for me to get my hands on. But if you have got a stockist, or if you can get it easily wherever you are, then I know that a lot of people very highly recommend that. So it might be worth checking that one out. Have a look on some forums or on a Facebook group or something. Where do people get Tester's Dull Coat locally to you? Finally, on the subject of varnishes and shades, I kind of stole a technique, let's say, from a World War II board where they were talking about how they paint armor. Now, a lot of the times when you're painting, a tank or something, it's plastic, you put some color over the top of it, and then you start getting into it with oils, enamels, and stuff like that. And using white spirits or a thinner over the top of that can damage the plastic, or it can just ruin the paint job underneath. So a lot of these guys will then hit the model with a varnish straight over the base coat to protect that while they work with the next steps in the model. Now I figured, what would happen if I did that on something, one of my own miniatures? Can I make that work in the same way? And the short answer is yes. Haha! So we have here a miniature that I sprayed with Corax White. I then hit it immediately with the Munitorum Varnish to give it that smooth finish. Then what I did was watered down some Agrax Earthshade, and I did this by mixing it about 50-50, maybe a little bit more Agrax Earthshade than that, but not by much, with Lahmian Medium to thin it out without losing its coverage. And then put that all over the miniature. Okay, if you look at on his rifle here, you can see sort of the very slight brown that it leaves on the high points, on the flatter areas, but it does settle in the recesses very nicely. Then I've given him a very quick dry brush of Ulthuan Grey over the top. That's it. What I could do now would be to go ahead and, edge highlight in white, fill in the rest of his gun and what have you, and he's done. It's not going to be as smooth as some of the other ways, and even other ways that I've painted white. But you could swap that out. Instead of Agrax Earthshade, use Drakenhof Nightshade, use non-oil. Whatever you want that sort of recess to look like. A shade with a half and half mix of medium and shade over these varnished base coats just takes no time at all. The other example I've got here, Crimson Fist's Intercessor. I started him from a black spray, I then hit him with some Cantor Blue, and then I did the 50-50 mix of non-oil straight over the blue. Dry brushed it with Ethereum Blue, which is very, very bright, and then gave it a quick shade of Guilliman Blue glaze over the top to tie it all together. Now these harder edges, I then went back with some Hoeth Blue just to pick out, but I used the dry brush as a guide. But you can see how it settles in the recesses so easily without significantly changing the overall color. All right. But here's the kicker. Here's the real star of the show for this particular thing. So an Imperial Fist, which I started from Corax White, gave him a couple of thin coats of Aerial Yellow. Then, over the top with the Munitorum Varnish, and I did a 50-50 mix of Lahmian Medium and Seraphim Sepia. And that gave me this nice, rich yellow. Over the top of that, I did a light dry brush of Tyrant Skull, and then some of the details I've picked out with some Screaming Skull to really make those highlights sing. And that's all that took. All right, there was no complicated mixing, there was no painful number of highlights or anything. It was just a base coat, a varnish, and then a shade to get all of these nice, deep... Let's get a little closer. you can see, oh, it's so smooth. I love it. And that is one of the tricks I wanted to share in particular. So, just to recap, guys, your varnish is down to how you want to use it, what you want the end result of the miniature to look like. Shades, make sure you're shaking them like nobody's business, and maybe, if you feel like experimenting, try a base coat with a varnish and then a shade over the top of that to see what kind of effects you can get. Anyhow, like I said, hopefully tomorrow the weather is going to break and we'll get into some proper painting, but as ever, feel free to drop a comment in the old box below. My Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. I tend to be pretty chatty on the old Twitter, so feel free, get in touch, say hi. Thank you very much for your time. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.